The Great Horned One by JLGoodwin1990. The Great Horned One shall carry you back from where he came. If he catches you out late, he'll bring you back to his nest. And from your bones, your flesh he'll wrest, and so shall seal your fate. That was the creepy as hell nursery rhyme that my parents taught me when I was a little kid. All the parents in my town told it to us kids for generations, using it as a way to scare us into getting home on time. In a way, it sort of became a local urban legend. Don't stay out long after dark, or else the Great Horned One will find you and take you away. Nobody knew what the supposed boogeyman even looked like, as none of the adults bothered to describe its appearance. But the consensus many of us made was that it had to be some kind of bird. Because of that, you'd often, during school hours, see kids making paper aeroplanes with the images of hawks and falcons on them, and then throw them at each other, shouting, "Look out! The Great Horned One is coming to get you!" We all laughed it off as just a tale though, something to keep us in line and nothing more. We did have a rather higher than usual average case of missing persons in our area, mostly children and teenagers, and most of the older kids choked that up as the reason it had persisted in our area for over a century. As I grew up from a kid into a teenager, any weariness or fear instilled in me by it washed away like water off a duck's back. All I wanted was to rebel as much as possible, mainly driven by the surge of hormones and ego-fueled testosterone that came with being a 16-year-old guy. That's why, when my friend Matt told me about a bonfire that was going on that night during the fall of 1998, being attended by all the cool kids from school, along with Casey, the girl I'd had a major crush on since freshman year, set far out in the farmland among the corn stalks, I immediately agreed to sneak out and go with him. My parents were heading off to a late-night movie showing at our local multiplex, and were leaving me alone. "We won't be back until past midnight," my mother told me, pulling her beige coat onto her shoulders. "And that means we're trusting you to be in bed no later than 11, my father added sternly. "Dad," I moaned out, but he cut me off. "No buts, young man. It's a school night, and I'm not going to get a call from the school telling me you've dozed off in class again." "Yes, sir," I said simply, lowering my head so he couldn't tell I was lying to him. And he nodded, turning to grab his car keys from their hook on the wall next to the door. "We left you money on the counter to order some pizza," my mother added, kissing me on the cheek. I nodded again, knowing full well I'd used the money to have Matt's big brother Jensen stop at the gas station on the way to buy a bottle for the three of us to share. With a last goodbye, they finally left. I stole a glance at the clock and saw it was just past 8:30. I wouldn't be picked up for at least another 20 minutes, so I swiped the money off the counter, plopped myself down onto the couch, and channel surfed while I waited. Almost on the dot, I heard a horn honk from out the front, and I grabbed my coat and walked out the front door. A sleek black Trans Am rumbled at the curb, and as I approached, Matt got out of the passenger seat, a huge grin plastering his face. "Dude, you ready to go out and get wasted? Maybe even small?" he called out. Small was the code word we used to talk about getting high, as a way to talk about it during school without the teachers catching on to our highly illegal plans. I returned the high five he offered me, a smile splitting across my face. "Fuck yeah, bro, this is going to be sick as hell," I exclaimed, then pointed at his slicked back black hair. "What the hell are you trying to go as, a 50s greaser?" I teased, then grinned at the realization. "You're trying to impress Jess, aren't you?" I asked coyly. He turned slightly red at my words, and I knew that I'd been on target. "I don't believe it," I said, unable to help but laugh. "You find out she's into tough guys, and you go and grab your brother's leather jacket and slick your hair back." I looked down at his feet, then back up at him. "What? No biker boots?" In response, he shot out and punched me in the arm. "Dude, shut up," he protested, looking embarrassed. He raised his head and tried to look tough, narrowing his eyes and raising his chin in a poor parody of a character from The Outsiders. "I just felt like dressing like this, that's all," he added in a defiant tone. "Sure," I replied, still grinning. He went to punch me in the arm again, but I dodged it and quickly grabbed my friend in a headlock. "Man, cut it out," he cried out. "Not till you say uncle," I retorted, laughing. "Hey, you two coming? Or do you want me to leave you to make out with each other?" came a deep, booming voice from the car. I let go of Matt, causing him to stumble back against the car. For a moment, he glared at me, then began to laugh. I shared it with him, slapping him on the shoulder as I leaned down, pulled the front seat forward and crammed myself into the back seat. "Hey, Jensen," I said as I sat down into the cramped space. He turned to me, the silver glint of his earring reflecting off the streetlight above us, and nodded. Matt climbed back in, and with a chirp of the tyres, we took off. After stopping and hiding in the car while his big brother went into the station to buy us a cheap bottle of liquor, we found ourselves driving on a dirt road towards the darkened shape of a farmhouse. The old Fredrickson farm sat as dark and quiet as a tomb. Old man Fredrickson and his wife were away on vacation for 2 weeks, and the hands who tended his fields in his absence had long already gone home, leaving us to have the run of the place. As we pulled up behind half a dozen other cars and trucks, I could see the bonfire burning brightly in the middle of a currently unused field. Logs had been pulled from the firewood pile beside the house for use as seats, and I saw everyone sitting there, laughing and passing around bottles and blunts. We got out of the car and let Jensen lead the way, hopping the wooden fence and crossing to the others. "Yo, Jensen, dude!" called out a hulking figure wearing a Letterman jacket, who stood up and embraced him. Perry and Jensen had both gone to school at the same time. However, due to a poor class record, he'd been held back a few years while his friends had graduated. The only reason he was tolerated and not expelled was due to being one of the toughest linebackers our school football team had. He noticed us as we stepped away from Jensen and smirked. "Well, well, look who decided to come along," he called out, raising his arms in a mocking parody of greeting a friend. "Matt and Kerry, here to pop their proverbial party cherries." I rolled my eyes at him. The two of us had never gotten along, and I never made any attempt to pretend otherwise. "Whoa, proverbial," I said with sarcasm dripping from every word. "Easy there, Per. You might end up using all 4 of your brain cells at once." Perry's face darkened into a scowl as a few others around the fire let out snickers. "Easy, guys," Jensen said. "We're here to cut loose and have fun, remember?" Matt looked apprehensively between me and the human refrigerator sizing me up. After a moment, Perry shrugged, though I could still see embers glowing in his eyes. "Yeah, sure, whatever," he said, patting Jensen on the shoulder and sitting down, before gesturing for us to do the same. "Well, park your asses and break out the booze," he ordered, a dopey grin spreading across his face as he snatched a bottle of vodka from the guy next to him, upending it and taking a huge swig. After a moment's hesitation, we all sat down, Jensen next to Perry, while Matt and I sat on a log across the fire from them. As he opened the bottle, I scanned the partygoers, soon seeing Casey sitting next to Jess, the two of them passing a joint back and forth and giggling at the exchange we'd just had. She noticed me looking, and with a shy smile gave me a quick wave, which I quickly returned. "Whoa," Matt gasped as he pulled the bottle back from his lips and made a face. "That packs a punch." He passed it to me, and I took a swig, wincing slightly at the sickening taste of the shitty whiskey. For the next hour or so, Everyone sat back and laughed, getting good and drunk and small, the previous tension forgotten about as the night grew darker around us. That's when Perry leaned forward. Okay, so before I tell my scary story, as is tradition, I'm letting you all know we're doing something new tonight. Eyes glanced up at him with a glazed, puzzled expression. He looked around, still grinning. We're going to play Truth or Dare, he proclaimed, causing a mixture of chuckles and grumbles to break out amongst the others. He held up his hands, quieting the group down, and his smile turned wicked. But first, he said, grabbing a joint from Jensen and taking a drag, the moments dragging on as he inhaled before letting out a cloud of smoke. A story. A scary story. I chuckled and shook my head slightly. Oh, this ought to be good. He looked around the campfire again, and then he began, leaning back so that his face was hidden in the dark. This is a story about Nina and Lyle Vernon, he began with a hushed tone, which caused everyone to shut up. Even I was now paying attention. Everyone knew about the Vernon siblings, 2 children who had disappeared without a trace one night in 1958, 40 years ago exactly. He stayed in the shadow. Now, Nina and Lyle were out one evening, hanging out with their friends and doing whatever shit kids in the 50s got up to. He was interrupted by a slurred call on the other side of the fire, a guy I couldn't see. "You mean your mother, Purr?" The circle broke out into laughter, which quickly was silenced as Perry cleared his throat. As I was saying, they were hanging out and doing whatever, and they don't realise that it's starting to get late. Too late. As the sun disappears in the sky, they tell their friends goodnight and race to get home. But they realise that they'd never make it in time taking the roads. They'll get home late and be grounded by their parents. So, they make a choice. They choose to cut across the farmland, as it'll be the quickest way home. First, though, they'll have to cut through the woods. And as they do, the wind begins to whip through the trees, howling softly, just like the sound of the dead crying out from beyond the grave. I have to admit, even I was beginning to become enraptured by his story. Clearly, everyone else was, as all eyes were on Perry. Damn, didn't think he was this good a storyteller, I thought. He continued. All they could do was hear the howl of the wind, their own breathing, and the sound of an owl, hooting softly somewhere deeper in the woods. They can't help but shiver at the sound, and they begin to walk faster. Soon enough, they leave the woods and begin to cross a cornfield. Perry leaned in, allowing his face to finally be seen in the flickering light of the fire. He had a solemn expression on his face. As they did though, they heard a whooshing sound pass over their heads and felt some kind of wind, sharper than the rest, hit their backs. They looked up, but they couldn't see anything, so they kept going, faster now. The sound of something passing over their heads comes again, this time from in front of them, and yet they still can't see anything. So now they're starting to feel afraid. Their parents have warned them about what will happen to them if they stay out late, past dark, and their only thoughts are about it. He looked around the campfire, seeing that none of us were even raising a bottle, and pressed forward. So, they begin to run, Lyle in front of Nina, and they hear nothing now, but they don't stop running. That's when. He paused, and I could see in the firelight that everyone's eyes were locked on our storyteller, unblinking. A few of the girls had huddled together slightly, with a look of fear on their faces. I felt the wind whip at my back, and I couldn't help but shiver slightly, pulling up the collar of my coat. That's when the sound comes again. But it's not the only sound. He hears his little sister cry out, hears her scream. He stops and whips around, but she's gone. An evil smile crossed Perry's face. He called and spun looking for her, but there was no answer. That's when he heard the voice. The voice, as dry as straw and as old as time, coming from everywhere and nowhere at once. It said, "I have come back for you, child." That's when Lyle turns and sprints away. He can see the lights of his family's farmhouse in the distance, but he never made it. Because at that moment, something seizes him from behind. Something picks him up off the ground and begins to carry him away. Away from his family, away from safety, away from everything. And when he looks up, his face looked almost demonic in the light of the flames. He screams because he sees what it has him. It's the great horned one. He realizes that his parents' warnings were true, and he screams his last scream as it carries him off into the dark to its nest, where it will feed on him and his sister. He finished, his voice lowering to a whisper. There was silence around the fire, with only the crackle of flames being heard. That's when someone burped, and the entire circle, Perry included, burst into drunken laughter. The tension, which had risen to almost a palpable level, evaporated, and the revelry atmosphere returned. "You're so full of shit, Per," Jensen shouted, pushing slightly on his friend's shoulder. But Perry shook his head, grinning and holding up his hands. "I swear to God, bro, that's a true story," he retorted, giving a shove back of his own. That was when I made the dumbass mistake of opening my own mouth, more from the liquid courage the booze had given me than anything else. "Well, if you aren't bullshitting us, then what does the terrifying great horned one look like, man?" His head snapped up, and I saw him shoot daggers at me across the circle. Instantly, I regretted saying anything. "Way to go, dumbass, you're about to get your ass kicked." But after a moment, a wicked smile split his face. He didn't answer my question, though. "Well, since you were the one to speak up, why don't we make you the first ever participant in our first ever Truth or Dare game?" he said, his grin widening. "And, because you're the first, one little change from how we normally play is, I get to choose which one you'll pick. Now, let's see," he said, stroking the stubble on his chin. "I think I'll have you pick Dare." He stood up, then pointed away into the darkness. "I dare you to go walk into the barn. You," he gestured to Matt, "and your little friend. In the dark." Everyone was looking at me now. I could see Casey looking at me with a slight expression of concern on her face. That's when Perry added, "That is, if you aren't a little chicken." I felt my cheeks flush and looked over again at Casey. I am not going to look like a complete pussy in front of my crush. I stood up, pulling Matt to his feet beside me. "Fine," I said in retort. "We'll be back in 5 or 10 minutes. I saw Jensen move like he was about to protest, then drop back. He obviously felt like this was a rite of passage for his little brother, one which he needed to make. "Well then, what are you waiting around for?" Perry said. "Get going." Sparing a last look at everyone, I stepped over the back of the log we'd been sitting on and walked around the circle towards the hulking shape of the barn on the far side of the property, Matt walking slowly and uncertainly with me. "That was a stupid move," he said to me as we hopped back over the fence and on slightly unsteady legs made our way along the drive. I let out a deep breath. "I know, man," I said, shaking my head slightly. "Once again, I find out why I get myself into trouble so much." He patted me on the shoulder. "Yeah, you do tend to let your mouth get ahead of your brain when you're wasted, but At least you've got me to make sure you don't get into any truly deep shit." We laughed softly and we continued past the darkened farmhouse. The wind began to whip up a little sharper as we strode along the side of another cornfield, shaking the stalks rising at least 3 feet over our heads. Very faintly, in the distance, I heard the call of an owl from the woods far beyond the property, and I couldn't help but shiver at the similarity to Perry's story. Like it or not, he had gotten under my skin. We stopped and looked up at the darkened behemoth before us. I knew it was painted red, with the paint faded and chipped from the elements. But in the dark, it was nothing but a black shape, rising out of the gloom. It isn't helping that the moon's not out tonight either, I thought. We stood another moment before I took a step forward. "Come on," I said with a sigh. "Let's get this over with and get back to the fire before someone decides to drink the rest of our bottle." Matt grumbled something unintelligible in reply, but helped me grab the slightly open door of the barn and pull it open enough to step inside. If it was dark outside, it was ocean abyss levels of black inside the building. I reached into my pocket and pulled out a lighter, flipping the top back and thumbing the wheel. A tiny, flickering yellow and orange light spread out from the flame, banishing away a tiny stretch of the dark, like it had been a monster. Holding it above my head slightly, we stepped inside. The floor was made of dirt, stretching away into the ether, and empty wooden horse and cow stalls lined the sides, creating a narrow corridor for us to walk down. The sound of our footsteps and the grinding of the dirt and pebbles beneath them echoed almost like a gunshot in the massive space, and I looked up. Oddly enough, Old Man Fredrickson had built a sort of sliding, retractable roof in the top of the barn, allowing the animals to get some fresh air during the night without giving away for predators to sneak inside. Currently, it was all the way back, giving us a clear view of the stars above. As we left the line of the stalls, we came to a large, open area. Hay bales were piled high on either side, and when I looked up, I could see a loft filled with more hay above us. It went so far back into the barn that I couldn't see the entire loft, only the very edge. As I stared up at it, I felt a creeping sensation sweep over me, as if I'd had someone draw a finger up my spine. It was the unmistakable feeling of being watched, though by what, I didn't know. There were no horses or cows in the barn. Maybe it's a raccoon or a rat, I thought. Matt shifted uncomfortably beside me. "So, am I the only one who's getting a weird feeling in here, or what?" he whispered to me, almost as if he were afraid of being heard by something. "No, you're not the only one, bro," I whispered back. "You feel like you have eyes on you too?" He nodded. "Yeah. You know what? Here's an idea. We did the deer. Now, why don't we get the hell out of here?" I shivered, then nodded. "Yeah, I think that'd be a good idea." We turned around to head back towards the exit. That's when the barn door closed, causing us both to jump slightly. The fuck?" Matt whispered. I looked at him and shook my head, shrugging my shoulders at him. I felt him draw just a little bit nearer to me, and I glanced around at the shadows looming just beyond the range of my lighter's flame. "I don't see anything," I whispered, then groaned. "What?" Matt asked. "Someone's playing a joke," I whispered, then raised my voice. "Perry, that you, man?" Silence. Silence, except for the creaking of wood and the howling of the wind through the open roof. I heard my voice waver as I spoke loudly again. "Perry, if this is a joke, it ain't fucking funny, asshole." There was still no reply. "Okay, this is too much. Let's go," Matt said, and I began to walk forward when I heard the crunch of hay come from my left. I pulled Matt close to me and flicked close my lighter, plunging us into complete darkness. "Shh," I whispered to him, reaching into my pocket and pulling out my penknife. I knew it would do exactly jack shit in a real life or death struggle, but it was something at least. The sound came again, closer this time, and I felt my heart begin to thump hard in my chest. I began to pull Matt by the shoulders in the direction of the door, trying to be as quiet as possible. The sound never let up, and at one point I swear I felt hay fall on us from above, but we both kept silently moving. That's when a darker shape leapt out from behind us, slamming into us and shoving us both face first into the dirt. Matt and I both let out frightened, pitiful screams as something pressed hard down onto our backs. I struggled in vain to try and wiggle free, but whoever or whatever had jumped on us was too heavy to get away from. I felt hot breath on the back of my neck and whimpered slightly as a whisper floated down to me from the darkness. "I've come for you both," it said, and we both let out the loudest screams we could, shrieking and clawing as fiercely as possible at our attacker. That's when the pressure on our back eased away and I heard something else. I heard someone begin to laugh, almost hysterically so. Scrambling to my feet, I whirled around to find a flashlight beam flicking on into my face, blinding me. I felt Matt climb up beside me, and we both squinted to see who it was holding the light. It lowered, and I felt my temper begin to rise. "Perry, what the fuck, man?" I shouted at the top of my lungs. Indeed, Perry stood there, his face red from a combination of alcohol and laughter, almost bent in half as he held his stomach. You too," he gasped out between almost sealed barks of laughter. "You should have seen the look on your faces. You two should have seen the look on your faces." He pointed a thick finger at me, and for a moment I was tempted to reach out and attempt to break it. Consequences be damned after this stunt. "You are a grade A asshole, you know that?" Matt screamed, running forwards and shoving Perry backwards. He stumbled, then laughed again. "Oh, come on, Matty. It was just a joke," he said, grinning. "It was nothing more than a joke. Your brother and I had it done to us when we were your age, and now it's your turn. Besides," he turned towards me and pointed, "you deserved it for calling me out." I rolled my eyes and had begun to turn away when a sound from above us stopped me. Creak. It was the sound of something shifting in the hayloft above us. Matt looked up, having heard it as well, but Perry was too busy laughing to notice. It came again. Creak. But this time it was accompanied by another sound. Tap, tap, tap. It was almost like the same sound you get when you drummed unclipped fingernails on wood. Now Perry did hear it. He stopped laughing and swung the flashlight around. "What was that?" he asked slowly. I shook my head. Looking around, he slowly began to walk down towards the other end of the barn. "Perry," I called. "Don't be fucking stupid, get back here." But he ignored me. "Perry," Matt hissed, before looking back at me. I sighed, then nodded. We both knew he was a complete prick, but he was also Jensen's friend. Whether we liked him or not, we couldn't leave him alone in here. Striding after him, we soon caught up to him, standing in the middle of the wide open area. "Perry, come on, let's go, dude," I insisted, tugging on his arm, but he wriggled out of my grip and shone the flashlight beam around. Where did that come from? He wondered aloud. The sound had stopped for a moment, leaving only the whistle of the wind. Then it started up again, faster now. Creak, tap, 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 creak, tap, tap, tap. Whatever it was moving towards us from above. The hayloft. "Perry," I began, but felt my voice wither and die in my throat as though someone had gripped me tightly around the neck. I felt my blood turn to ice and the colour drain from my face as I attempted to process what I was seeing. I was looking at a pair of eyes, 2 gigantic, glowing yellow eyes, staring down at us from the darkness above the loft. They never blinked, and I felt my bladder, full from the alcohol I drank, let go. They continued to stare, unblinking and cold, the way a predator regards its prey. I willed for a scream to escape my lips, but no sounds came out. Perry pointed the flashlight at me. "What?" he asked, but I couldn't answer. I couldn't look away from the yellow orbs, ones the size of dinner plates. "What?" Matt demanded, then turned to follow my gaze. Unlike myself, he was able to let out a scream, and it attracted Perry's attention to look up, shining the flashlight and revealing the creature that the eyes were attached to. God, I would have been so much happier to never have known. My first thought that it was an owl, a great horned owl, but the only thing that tied this thing to an owl was its figure. It had the same body, the dark feathers glinting in Perry's flashlight beam, the same sharp, curved beak, the same long, sharp talons gripping the edge of the loft. But no owl could ever be this size. Even bending over slightly, its ears grazed the rafters of the barn's roof, making it at least 15 feet tall. And, worse still, was I saw a corner of feathers near the edge of its beak lift slightly, almost in a mocking caricature of a smirk. What the fuck is that?" Perry cried out. Matt was the one who answered him, the great horned one. He let out a whisper. Perry stammered, But it's only a myth, a legend. It's not real." And with that, he turned to run. We all did, but it was too late. With an effortless hop, it leaped down from the loft, letting out an ear-piercing shriek that rattled my eardrums. The impact of it landing sent me flying off my feet onto the floor, and I felt my nose break as it slammed into the dirt. Blood began profusely dripping out of my nose, but I was too preoccupied to notice. I whirled around onto my back, searching for the others. My eyes caught the beam of Perry's flashlight, which he'd dropped. The beam was pointed back towards the center of the wide area, and it caught a horrific sight. When the creature had launched itself down, it had opened its talons, just like a normal owl would catch a mouse or a snake, and its aim had been true. Lying underneath its talons lay my best friend and Perry. Perry lay face down, making no sound, and the reason why was clear. The talon had pierced directly into his back, pinning him to the floor. A pool of blood was stretching out from his still form, staining the dirt around him like someone had splattered red paint everywhere. Matt, however, oh God, no. Matt was still alive. He'd just missed being impaled and was instead clutched in the other talon, which had closed tightly around him. He couldn't let out a scream. He just lay there, feebly attempting to free himself and whimpering softly. The creature, the great horned one, looked down at him as he futilely attempted to escape, regarding him with a predatory coldness. Then it lifted its head and locked its eyes on me. I felt a shiver run down my spine, and I began to shake uncontrollably. It began to lean towards me. It was so gigantic that it didn't even need to take a step forward. I pressed my back as far into the dirt as I could as it towered over me, almost as if willing myself to sink into the earth. All I could see were the glowing yellow eyes now, and I could smell and feel its breath on my face. It was rancid and smelled of long dead things. I was crying now, tears mixing in with the blood from my nose. And then it opened its beak, the area underneath it puffing out the way owls do to hoot, but no cry came from it. It spoke, in a voice that sounded like it came from everywhere and nowhere at once, one that sounded as dry as hay and filled with nothing but hatred and pure evil, and only a sinister whisper. "I'll come back for you." I raised my arms over my face, curling into a ball and finally let out a scream, an ear-piercing one that was louder than I ever had or ever have since uttered. I heard a whoosh sound, but kept my hands over my head. When I finally pulled them away, I was alone. It was gone, left out the open roof. Perry was gone as well. And Matt. It took me a long time to get to my feet. I was shaking far too much to do anything but lay there. When I finally did, I stumbled on unsteady legs out of the barn and back to the group of people around the fire. They called jokes and jeers, laughing as I approached, but when they saw my face, they stopped. And when they realized I was alone, they ran to the barn, calling the others' names. When they saw the pool of blood, one of them broke into the farmhouse and called the cops. The place was soon lit up by a cacophony of blue and red lights, along with concerned parents flooding in as well. The police cordoned off the area and took everyone's statement. When they got to me, after I'd calmed down somewhat, wrapped up in a blanket on the back bumper of the ambulance, I told them the truth. I knew it sounded nuts, but I didn't care. They didn't believe me, of course, and I knew they wouldn't. Who would believe that something out of a local nursery rhyme, however demented it was, had taken them? They put out a statement saying that it had to either have been an animal attack or a group of people who had attacked us, making off with the bodies afterwards, and choked up my hallucinations to head trauma. My parents took me and moved away from town before the end of the year. A lot of the parents of teenagers there that night did the same, fearing their child might be next to be attacked and vanish. It caused the town to more or less dry up. Today, it's just a shell of itself. I also heard that Jensen ended up driving his car off a bridge into the river 2 years later. I can only assume it was out of guilt of not stopping his little brother from going with me. That was 25 years ago. I'm 41 now. I live in New York City, far away from any farmland, from any barn or woods. I'll never leave the city. I'm too afraid of that thing keeping its promise to me. I can't help but break out into a cold sweat and scream when even just the shadow of a damn pigeon passes over me. And if anything even remotely related to owls turns up on the TV, I freeze before quickly changing the channel. I know it's still there. The continual disappearances of kids and teenagers that I hear from the few people who were there that night who stayed is proof of that. And I can't help but wake up screaming every single night, screaming from the reoccurring dreams I have of my friend being torn apart and devoured in a giant nest, one filled with the bones of its previous meals, of cold, yellow eyes staring at me from the dark, and of that voice, that damned internal whisper, "I'll come back for you." I just want to thank JLGoodwin1990 for allowing me to narrate this story. If you like what you heard here, head over to their Reddit page. They've got some amazing stories, and I'm sure you won't be disappointed. If you're new here, please consider subscribing, and as always, stay tuned for one more nightmare.